Okay.
Hey, Georgia.
Good evening, everyone. It's approximately 6 p.m. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission's meeting. I want to welcome all of our commissioners, our special guests. Thank you for joining us. The meeting at this time will begin. I'll call to order. We usually call our meeting to order and remind everyone specifically of the mission of the Human Relations Commission, which is to promote the fair and equal treatment of county residents, counteract racism, discrimination, intolerance, hate, and bias incidents. And man, are we in a time in which this mission is appropriate. At the same time, I'd like to also remind everyone about our vision. Our vision is working together for equality. At this time, I'd like to begin with a roll call by our secretary, Mary Dodoni. When she calls your name, if you would please answer by saying present. Mary? Mary Dodoni, you're muted, Mary. There you go. Okay, I will go ahead and start with the roll call. Georgia Noon Sherrod, present. Faye Gaskin.
Present.
Mary Dodoni.
Present, and now I can hear. Would you like me to continue? I'm so sorry.
Okay. Eugene Peterson.
Present.
Mohan. Let's see here. Mark Apter. I see that Mark is present. Khalid Syed. Khalid, I see that you're present. Pastor John Watt. Tony Strong Pratt.
Present.
Fantastic. Let's see here. And Tosin, are you present? Yes, I see you're there.
Present.
Present. Fantastic. Appreciate it. Mark, I see you're there. Okay. So all are present with the John Watt, Pastor Watt, is he on yet? Okay, we will wait for the two to join us in a moment. We also have with us our liaison, Alana Dennis is with us.
Present.
Okay, and we have special guest, County Executive Stuart Pittman.
Hello.
Pete Barron, Government Relations Director.
Good evening, everyone.
And Major Catherine Goodwin with the Anne Arundel County Police Department.
Good evening.
Good evening. Okay. We have one more special guest who will join us in just a moment, closer to 7 o'clock. And she is with the Housing Commission for Anne Arundel County, and that is Lanita Hillen. Okay. Forgive me. Adoption of the minutes. The agenda is, has everyone had an opportunity to review the agenda? Thumbs up. Okay. By common consent, can we approve the agenda? If so, again,
Yes.
Thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay. All right. The agenda has been adopted. The minutes from the May 21st meeting. Now, keep in mind, we did have a call meeting on June the 2nd. So I'm specifically referring to the minutes from the May 21st meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to see those minutes?
Georgia, I just sent those to you. I can display them on my screen if I have display ability, or you might be able to display them on your screen.
Okay.
Or I could read them since they're rather brief.
Let me ask this, Faye, as our parliamentarian, can we table the review of the minutes for everyone to have an opportunity to thoroughly review the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, so we would basically request to table those.
A motion to table.
Okay. Need a second on that?
A second.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded that we table the review of the minutes from the May 21st meeting. Any questions? Seeing none, we will table the review of the minutes from the May 21st meeting for our next monthly meeting. Okay. Now, with that formal business being out of the way, I'd like to give the floor over to the county executive, Stuart Pittman. On the agenda, we have proposed the facilitation of the Civilian Review Board. But if there's something else in particular that you'd like to add to that, Mr. County Executive, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. You're right that this is an important time for the Human Relations Commission, so I'm glad that you're doing extra meetings and stepping up into this moment. I guess on the way I'm seeing the work that we have to do that we should have done a long time ago for the county is that we have to do the policing review and look at everything in the police department, from general accountability, use of force, de-escalation, all the training, how complaints are reviewed, civilian oversight, and all of that has to happen. So the Civilian Review Board is part of civilian oversight, clearly, and Alana has collected about a dozen things for me to read and my staff to read that I've started to look through on Civilian Review Board research and Civilian Review Board models around the state and around the country. I talked to the chief this morning and came to the conclusion after asking a lot of questions that I and some of my new staff leadership, which you may have noticed in the paper, we've just moved Kay Bodgester Brown into the chief of staff position and Matt Power into the CAO position. And so the three of us, and I'm going to ask Alana to join us. I can't remember if I've asked you already, Alana, but after talking to her this morning, I feel like her presence is important because of her knowledge. To sit down and spend 3 hours with the police department, learning everything we can about the process as it exists right now, for particularly how complaints are processed within the police department, so that we can get a better understanding of the role of a civilian review board or any other changes that get made to make that process more transparent, more accountable, and more effective within the law. So that will be happening soon. Had a Tuesday night, just 2 nights ago, I guess, we had an online forum about policing. We did not get into all the issues that I would have liked to in that in an hour, but I guess the part of policing that I've learned the most about in the last week comes from talking particularly to the Black officers in the county, who have an organization that's recognized, not structured as a nonprofit, but recognized by the department, Black Officers Association. And I met with about 50 of them last week, and people opened up. The chief had met with them already that day, and I met with them separately. And I did walk away from that feeling like we do have a problem, and it's a similar problem to what we have in all the departments of county government and throughout our communities. But within the police department, it's intensified, because when you come in and you feel like your team doesn't have your back, then you really are left out there in a very, very difficult situation. I mean, policing is all about the team and everybody having each other's back, and I think it's been difficult for some of our Black officers, and their complaints aren't primarily with the top leadership. It's more some mid-level, and it depends on where you are and who you're with, and so I know that Alana's worked with the police department. I know that they've done fair and impartial policing training. They've done a lot of work, particularly in the last 5 years, on the 21st Century Policing Report. But as long as we have people feeling like we're not there yet, then we're not there yet. So I'm going to continue communicating with that group as well as the leadership, and then doing the engagement process. And that part we're still figuring out. We've got so many people who want to jump in and make this happen. The community engagement piece of all of this, and not just on policing, but also health written broadly and equity broadly. And so we've got to continue the work that you all started and would have continued had the coronavirus not happened with in-person meetings after the forum, and figure out how to continue that. We've got to do, I think, what the 21st Century Policing Report recommended that was not done in the county, which was a real review with community engagement and surveys about people's attitudes about police and how they can be improved. So we want to do that piece. And then the health piece and the health equity piece, which I know was going to be planned anyway, Healthy in Arundel and the health equity and racial justice staffing that we're about to fill there. And at least those three parts all have to happen and have to come together. And so I don't want to just quickly make a decision that this is how it's going to be, because there's so many smart people, including everybody on this call, who are wrestling with those issues right now. But I do want to get moving quickly, which is why we did the Tuesday call, and we've done a lot of these forums just in the last week or so. And we do have to move quickly and fix the things that we know how to fix immediately. And then the things that take longer, they're going to take longer, but we want to do the right and do that process. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to stop doing this. And I don't want you to stop pushing me on the things that you think need to happen. As far as the Human Relations Commission's scope, that's another piece that we have to look at and do right. I want to make sure that you understand that we want you for now to do what you're doing and do everything as broadly as you see your mission. Alana does the actual complaints and does that process, and you're going to look at whether we can expand that, put it into the code, whether we can get the votes to put it into the code for the Human Relations Commission's work on housing to be expanded broader. But for now, your staff liaison from our office is the person who handles those. So she can give you the information that she can give you legally, obviously not about the individual cases, but and she can work with you on what's the best way to broaden that. And then Pete, who will speak after me, can talk about what it would take to change the county. Obviously you guys know what pretty much it takes to get legislation passed, but that would be the next step once we have our proposal tight. And if we're talking about creating a department with staffing, then we have to do all of the work around figuring out what the budget for it would be to get it into the budget. So it's all on the table, but that part, like the Civilian Review Board, is going to take some time to get it right to be able to do something. I guess the only other thing I want to say is a couple of miscellaneous items. We're putting out a proclamation in the morning on about June 19th. And we're giving staff what's it called? Leave, not administrative leave, but liberal leave. Right. I hate that word, liberal. Liberal leave, because everybody calls me one. And so that people can take off time to, if they choose to celebrate Juneteenth, and particularly to be a part of the vigil that I'm going to be part of tomorrow afternoon that starts at Whitmore Park across from the Arundel Center. And a little piece of news that I got just today, just this afternoon, right before this meeting. I think people are aware now of, maybe they already were, about the statue down in Lothian, the Benjamin Welch Owens statue. So there's the statue itself that was raised with private money and was plunked on that piece of ground that the church controls. And then there's a description of the history of Mr. Owens and why it's there. And that's part of the Civil War Trail, and which is funded by the state and the federal government. and they put that information board up, and so we communicated with them, and the director of that, who came in maybe 10 years ago, said that when he came in, he looked at all the markers in the state, all the things on the trail, and that was the marker he said had to go. That marker was, most of them are trying to explain the history of the Civil War, and this one was really honoring Confederates, and it's gone. They had some trouble getting a hold of the church to be able to move it, but it's owned by them, and they took it away today. So that's one step in the right direction. I hope the church does the same thing. But it really kind of shocked me that that thing was put up 21 years ago as a celebration of what this guy stood for, and I think that's the kind of thing we need to fix to be able to move forward. So I guess that's my update since I talked to you last about 2 weeks ago. Lots going on, and we could expect to be continuing spending a lot of our time in the next few months on implementing all the things that I just talked about.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. We appreciate your update. I know that some of the commissioners have some questions, so at this time we'll entertain those. So if you would just please raise your hand and I'll recognize you from there and ask you to take mute off. Questions, comments, feedback? Mary?
Thank you. County Executive Pittman. I've had the opportunity to talk with Sons of the Confederate Veterans over the years. They have a perspective that I don't share, but I acknowledge that they feel they're being suppressed, and I don't feel that suppression is going to do us much good. How are we going to look at a way of telling a united history that doesn't exacerbate the hostilities?
Yeah, I think telling history is obviously something that, I mean, I think that the history, the way it's been explained, has prevented us from being able to move forward. You know, this notion that the Civil War was about states' rights, and not really about maintaining an economic and a social system that was based on enslavement. So, and you know, the fact that Alana sent me the video of from the Equal Justice Initiative, the trailer for the movie that Brian Stevenson was kind of explaining a perspective that I think I share, which is that this country didn't do what other countries did, like in South Africa after apartheid or in Germany after the Nazis, and there was never truth and reconciliation, and I think the truth part hasn't always been told truthfully, and so that's not easy to get people who were taught it one way to see it a different way, but the Civil War trails. People want to do something instead of the Owens statue, and they want to do it at parole, and they want to talk about a part of the Civil War history about Camp Parole, and that would not be celebrating a Confederate for what a Confederate did. So yeah, I mean, I think we need to. I think now's the time to push the school system to do better education, better curriculum about Black history. And I think that the county should do that as well. We've got some stuff that we've done that's been good, but I think, you know, we have that online Black History Trail that is Four Rivers area that we should expand to the rest of the county. And then I think there should be markers, and there should be monuments, and there should be things out there for people to see. So I think it's an area where we got a lot of work to do. But as far as being divisive, and I get the feeling that the public is moving, and the polls show it. that people get it, that racism is real, and that we have failed in this country to address it the way other countries did, and I think they're ready for that story.
Okay.
I didn't get any nasty phone calls about that column that I wrote.
Mhm.
I heard other people call other people and say nasty things, but they
They were too busy being nasty towards Dr. Arlotto that week.
okay. I mean, I got to say, I don't read all the comments on Facebook, so I know they were nasty there too. But
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or feedback? Mr. County Executive, I do have, for the purpose of clarity, when you talked about civilian oversight versus civilian review board, I want to make sure that we are keep that in the forefront. You talked about a number of different things that we should, as a community, be focused on. Is there a timeline associated with the engagement process? And the reason I ask this question is that we individually as commissioners receive different information or questions or comments. And because many of us are involved in different organizations also, we hear from different constituents about how this would be rolled out, how they would be involved in any type of oversight. And will there be an independent body involved in this process versus this just being something handed over to a commission or a board? Is there a timeline, again, associated with the engagement as it relates to equity, health, and policing?
not yet, but there will be soon.
Okay.
We'll put the process together. I don't want to, I mean, if this takes beyond September to get to the point where we've gone through the process and we have a plan, then I'm going to feel like we've failed, like we won't move too slow. There are going to be people who are probably going to suggest that we contract with somebody to do a process that might take longer because we have to go through procurement and all of that. Well, if we're going to end up doing that, we got to do something now. In addition to that, that brings us most of the way there. I mean, I think so. There has to be something that comes to some conclusion this summer, in my view.
Okay.
Or we've lost the moment,
Exactly. Okay. Any other questions from anyone else? If not,
Yeah, I have a question.
go ahead, Eugene. Go ahead.
I put my hand up, but it didn't.
Oh, I
don't know what happened.
apologize. Yeah, go
That's
ahead.
fine. I want to thank the county executive for recognizing that if our duties are expanded, we need a staff because we can't do work that would be suggested in an expanded commission without a commensurate staff. And I'm happy to hear that there's a recognition that has to happen. Given everything that's going on these days and being a Black man living in America right now, I think we need to have some action. So I'd like to know whether the county is ready to put legislation forth because I met with the police chief and he has training that bans chokehold, but there's no legislation that does that. There's no legislation that bans no-knock warrants, and there's no legislation that bans shooting at cars like what happened tragically as part of that fiasco in Atlanta. So would you and yourself be in favor of putting that kind of legislation forward, Mr. County Executive?
Yeah, and actually what we're thinking about is an executive order. So we have to figure out from law what we can do by executive order and what has to be done by the council. And so, part of sitting down for 3 hours going through the all of the policies is figuring out what we can change. Now, there's some things I think the police department can change, even if I didn't tell them to do it. And I know that the chief is looking at a number of those things. So, yeah, I agree that we have to do some things soon. And executive order is the quickest mechanism that we have. So we're working on a list, and that's the first step. We'll go to the council if we need to go to the council, but we won't if we don't need to. I mean, we'll make. Or we
Okay,
may do
thank you. I
executive
just
order
think
and then do the legislation to get it, to get it to stay.
Right. Yeah, because if it becomes legislation, then if it happens tragically, it's not lawful and awful, it's criminal.
Right.
Mr. County Executive, did I hear you at the end say that you would go from an executive order to legislation? Is that correct? So it's
Well, that could be done. I mean, it
Okay.
depends on, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it depends on the topic. I don't believe that most police policies, and you can, Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that they're in legislation. I think I would have to find out from the Office of Law and people smarter than I am about what we can and can't put in legislation. But I think there's a lot of flexibility there that we can get the council votes. We can put it in the code.
And I don't want it to fall on deaf ears. The piece that Eugene started with, which was the idea of having and requiring that we have some sort of budget to support staff in the efforts to do any type of expansive work beyond what we're doing right now. I applaud the work that Alana does. She does a yeoman's job. She does a lot of heavy lifting for us, but all as full-time employees on someone's payroll here. I know that I can speak for myself. I don't have another hour of time to do anything else. And if we are to be of assistance to the county beyond the things that we're doing right now, that has to happen. But speaking of the expansion of our duties, at this point, if no one else has any additional questions, I'd like to bring Pete Barron, Director of Government Relations, give him the floor, allow him to speak with us about the expansion of powers and also about the resolution that the draft resolution that you all received a copy of. Okay. Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Appreciate your time.
Thanks. I'll probably stay to listen to what Pete has to say, and then I'm gonna probably jump off after that.
You're welcome to stay as long as you
Gotta
like.
watch this guy,
Yeah. Okay.
Good evening, members of the commission. Madam Chair, do you want to put the draft or the proposed bill up on your screen so everybody can see what we're talking about? So I was asked to discuss this. So let me back us up a little bit and give some brief history on how we got to where we are as a commission before we start talking about where we want to go next. In June of 2019, a piece of legislation was introduced to create a codified human relations commission. It was something the county executive had talked about almost from day one about bringing forward a codified human relations commission. Prior to that date, prior to that bill passing, and it didn't pass until September of 2019, prior to that bill passing, the Human Relations Commission only existed by executive order. And I actually said at the table, I know a number of you were there testifying on it, maybe you watched it, that the powers of the Human Relations Commission were limited to basically a strongly worded letter. That was all the commission was allowed to do under the executive order. And creating a codified human relations commission that had the ability, particularly in the area of housing, to address discrimination was an initiative that the county executive strongly supported. Councilwoman Lacey and Councilman Pruski were champions for it on the council. It ended up getting the 4 votes it needed to pass, as I mentioned, on September 3rd of 2019. So we're not even a year out. the proposal that's in front of you was drafted by Councilman Pruski. And for those that don't know anything about Councilman Pruski, he is the only veteran of the council. He is the only council member that started or had a term under his belt. The other 6 council members all are in their first term. So Councilman Pruski has a little bit of institutional knowledge of what it's like, particularly on a council that is, and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic here, hostile to some of the issues that we are working on now. If anybody can think back to the years between 2014 and 2018 and who was on that council and what that majority was pushing for, I think you would agree with me. So I called him today just to chat and let him know that I was going to be discussing this with you all tonight. And just to confirm what I knew was true, which is why he did it. This resolution creates a charter amendment that will go to the voters to enshrine the Human Relations Commission in the Anne Arundel County Charter. So, and I apologize if this is remedial legislative process for anybody, but a charter, our charter governs the county. In order to make a change to the charter, you need 5 votes on the council and you need the voters to approve it. So once something is in the charter, it is much more difficult to remove it. So Councilman Pruski's desire is to ensure that any future council that comes would have to go back to the voters and get 5 votes if they wanted to get rid of a Human Relations Commission. This bill simply says, and if you look down at line 14, there shall be a Human Relations Commission for Anne Arundel County that is independent of the legislative and executive branches of county government. The commission shall perform the duties and functions set forth in the county code. That would not change anything that we are doing right now. The question is outlined on line 23. This is what the voters would have to decide to amend the Anne Arundel County Charter to require the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission. It does not speak to the specific powers of the Human Relations Commission. That would all still be set in code. So as we are talking about the proposals that you all are working on to expand the scope of the Human Relations Commission, the question before the council and this resolution, excuse me, will be heard and voted on July 6th. So it's a proposed piece of legislation. That, if it is approved by 5 votes at the council, it will then go to the voters, and the voters will vote up and down whether there should be a Human Relations Commission in the county. And I am confident that it will pass. So this piece of legislation is rather narrow in terms of the stuff that this commission has talked about. The way I think Councilman Pruski views it, and I would agree, is this is a level of protection for the Human Relations Commission. It is the next logical step for the Human Relations Commission to take as what was once an executive order, then becomes codified, then becomes enshrined in the charter. So that's where we are. I think I'm happy to answer any questions I think I covered everything I scribbled down that I wanted to say on that. And just to let you know that I think when I talked to Councilman Pruski, he was excited and interested in having conversations with all of you. And if you wanted to work to have him at a future meeting, he asked me to make that offer.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. I really appreciate that. Are there any questions from anyone at this point, this time? Feedback?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, Pete, I'm sorry, Eugene, and then Mary.
I think this is well intended, but given the fact that we live in Anne Arundel County, how do you keep this from becoming part of the cultural wars? And so, I mean, an unintended consequence could this could get voted down. I know it's a presidential election. I know it's a brief item, but how do we keep from becoming a political football?
Thank you, Mr. Peters. I mean, that's a fantastic question. One, I would say the ballot measures are, you know, it's simple, right? It allows you to create a human relations commission. And I know we are in Anne Arundel County, but as many of you know me, I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of Anne Arundel County residents. I am fully convinced that this would pass. Now, if worst case scenario happens and it failed, it would not remove the Human Relations Commission from the code. And this council is committed to protecting it. So this would not risk it removing. It would be a black eye for it or a gut punch, but I don't believe that that would happen. And boss, you can contradict me, but I have faith in the good people of Anne Arundel County that they recognize the important work that you all are doing. And I am confident that having a human relations commission, and you saw it in the testimony, if you were a part of the bill that passed in 2019, hundreds of people came out in favor of creating the Human Relations Commission, and the haters that came out were small and I'll just say it, weak.
Well, and they were coming out on the housing issue. You know, it was the landlords and it was the, you know, the Grassos of the world. This is sort of broad enough sounding, I think, that I'd be surprised if anybody really talked much about it. I don't think it's something that anybody would really campaign for, because it wouldn't be necessary, I wouldn't think. So I don't think it would be in the public sphere a whole lot. Oh, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would.
And if it is, let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's exactly, like, this is the kind of discussion. This is how we have to force, if people have an issue with a group of good folks like yourself taking on discrimination. That's the debate we should have. I will also add one other thing. There's a couple of other charter amendments that will be on the ballot, and they are there are two that have been already approved by the council. There's a package of a couple of more, and both of those are related to good government stuff. So this fits right in. One has to do with expanding the powers of the auditor, for example, which is something the county exec talked about even back on the campaign trail, to allow for accountability and open government. So this actually fits very well with.
And another one of them actually is to extend the probationary period for public safety. If the department wants to do it and the police department does, so it would go from 12 to 18 months. And the chief has argued that that gives him more time when an officer comes out of the academy and then they get out onto the street to evaluate whether or not we want them on the police department. It's a lot easier to get rid of them while they're still under probation. So that could be useful in terms of screening, getting the right people.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. Just to follow up with that, I think Mary has a question. I just wanted, Mary, before you ask your question, I just wanted to clarify, Eugene, on your question, if I'm hearing you correctly, there's a concern that potentially voters, because of the simplicity of the way this is written, may not understand the importance of it. Are we talking about or asking for some type of campaign around clarifying what it's for? Obviously, the language is what the language is, but I want to make sure I understand and the rest of commissioners understand what you're asking.
Well, what I'm asking simply is that we be aware that this is a potential issue that we have to deal with in the county, and that whenever there are hearings or other sorts of activities that we get people mobilized to come out and speak for this kind of effort. And I have tremendous hope in the good aspects of people's good feelings and whatnot. But we're living in a volatile time now. We need to be mindful of what that means, and that was my point. And I'm very thankful of Mr. Barrett's and the county executive's explanations. Sounds like if we couch it in terms of good government, I think we're in a pretty good shape.
Okay, thank you. Mary, your question?
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to elaborate on the word independent, especially in light of the fact that I really anticipate they're going to have a lot of discussions about civilian review boards, and the word independent is going to have a very loaded meaning in that context. And the discussions are likely to take place at nearly the same time. That's it. Could you expand on what you mean by independent of the legislative and executive branches?
Sure. So to be clear, just the county executive, the administration supports this. We did not draft this language. But I believe the intent is like many other things that are enshrined in the charter, that it is an independent body. So the way that, for example, I'm trying to think of a good analogy that is also in the charter. Maybe the Board of Appeals. It would be a good sort of analogy for what is meant by independent. That the county executive and the county council appoint members just like you all were appointed, but then you don't directly report to. Once you're appointed, you have to be removed for cause. And Alana, if I'm catching that wrong, please say so. But the county executive couldn't say, well, Mary, you looked at me funny today, so you're off this commission, right? That's what they mean by independent, that you would have to be removed for some cause.
Thank you.
NP, can we also assume that independence has also is relative to the decisions that we make as a body? That our decisions are independent of any other entity that may have appointed us. There's no quid pro quo as it relates to the decisions and the process that we use.
That is how the legislation that set you up was designed, to make sure that you guys are truly a decision-making body.
Okay. And just for clarity, as Mary was talking, she was specifically speaking of in line I think it's 15.
15.
Yeah. There shall be a Human Relations Commission for Anne Arundel County that is independent of the legislative and executive branch. Any other questions or comments?
I think the voters will like that too, because they don't like the legislative or the executive branch. That's the politicians.
Could be the case. Could be the case. Okay, and I think that you did speak specifically to the expansion. So just so that we have clarity for everyone that is here, you specifically said, Pete, that the powers related to the commission would be in the code of the county council. And so therefore, what we would need to do as far as it relates to specific tasks or expansion of duties, we would need to come up with that. And of course, that is something that would be separate and apart and would be voted upon by county council. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I do want to be sensitive on time because I could give you a 25-minute dissertation on the county legislative process. But basically, if there is going to be a proposal, when there is a proposal to change the Human Relations Commission's scope or authority, that will have to move through the legislative process, just like the bill that created the Human Relations Commission. That is independent and separate from the charter question of whether or not the Human Relations Commission is enshrined in the charter.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity. So I think that we all understand now that the resolution is something, the draft resolution is something that you said you feel positive will pass county council. That then, of course, will go before the voters in November. And then after November, any specific proposal that we've made to the county executive will be put before the county council and then voted up or down. Okay. All right. Well, we thank you for your time. Are there any other questions? Mr. County Executive, yes, go ahead.
I was just waving goodbye.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. All right. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Stuart. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the commission. It's great to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks for everything you're doing, and you know, come up with a process for us. You know, follow up on the you know, the February meeting with that process, you know, particularly.
We got you.
So yeah, I know you've been, you know, ready to do that, and I'm looking forward to it.
We
Thanks.
got you. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Okay. At this time, we're going to have our liaison from the County Police Department, Major Catherine Goodwin, talk with us about a hate bias incident report. Has everyone received a copy of the report? You should have received it via email. Tony, John, did you get a copy of the email? No. Okay, John, I'll make sure that you get, just check your email. Tony, you said you did or you didn't?
I have a copy.
Oh, you do? Okay, fantastic.
I'm not sure if I have a copy yet because I've done anyway. I'll go back and check.
Okay. Well, Major Goodwin's going to go over the big numbers, and if need be, you know, I can pull up a copy of the report and we can go it from there. But Major Goodwin, I'll give you the floor at this point, this time.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me back. So like Ms. Georgia said, I was asked to give a report for the hate bias incidents that we've had in the county for 2020. I'll just let you know that the numbers that I sent out to everyone on that Excel sheet just counts from January through May. So we have not captured June right now. So it's just January through May for 2020. So when you break it down, so far we've had 16 incidents, which are 16 reports in the county that involve 19 victims. Just remember, sometimes one incident, you'll have multiple victims. So we've had 16 reports with 19 victims. This time last year, for January through May of 2019, we've had 31 at this time. I can say, it's my opinion, but most likely the decrease that we've seen in it obviously is COVID related. Some of it, more people are staying inside. We don't have people going out to businesses. Certainly school being closed for the last 2.5 months probably impact those numbers as well. So even though we see a decrease, I think there's some explanation on why it was such a drastic decrease compared to last year. So looking at the 16 incidents, we break them down as far as the type of incident. So 14 of them were verbal intimidations. So when I say verbal intimidations, that's the majority of what we see. It's using that derogatory word. It's not necessarily that a crime was involved, but it was somebody using the N word, somebody saying a derogatory word towards any race, towards any sexual orientation. So it's just usually some kind of name calling when we talk about verbal intimidation. Followed by one was a written intimidation. So somebody put it in writing instead of verbally saying it, it was in writing. A lot of times we'll see that written on walls, on people's cars, using a derogatory word or a derogatory symbol. Followed by 3 of those were assaults, and then there was 1 arson. When we break it down by type, and what I mean by type, we mean by offense, which is a crime was committed in addition to it being hate bias, and then it's also an incident. Incidents, as a reminder, and I know I've talked to this group before, we report not just on crimes, we also report on an incident. So we actually take a report on any racial bias incident, even if it doesn't involve a crime. If no crime occurred and it was just 2 people getting into an argument and 1 person used a derogatory word, we take a police report for that. It doesn't have to involve a crime. So when you break it down to those, out of the 16 incidents, 6 of them, a crime was also committed while using hate bias, and then 13 of them were actual just incidents where there was no crime involved. Of the ones where a crime was actually committed, we have 2 arrests that were made on those, and 1 was charged with a hate crime. It actually met that statute, the state statute, for charging somebody with a hate crime. 1 person didn't want to pursue criminal charges, which was their right. They said, you know what, we just want the police report, but we don't want the person charged. 2 of the incidents, we weren't able to ever identify the suspects to make a charge. And then 1 was a misdemeanor that didn't happen in the police officer's presence. So like any other misdemeanors, we exchange information, and then the victim, it's up to them to seek charges with the court commissioner. So that's where we were with the breakdown on the types. As far as the bias types, we had 13 that involved race, which is usually what we see. When you break it down by race, 10 involved a victim that was Black, 1 was a white victim, and then 2 were Hispanic victims. Then we had 3 religious incidents, and we had 2 that were sexual orientation. So that's kind of a snapshot on that. I know one of the members had asked me to break it down by district also, geographical. So I think most of you know how our county is. We have a northern, southern, eastern, and western. I can get more specific as far as the areas it covers, but in our northern district, which is our Brooklyn, parts of Glen Burnie, Linthicum, there was 1 incident so far this year. In our eastern district, which is mostly Pasadena, Millersville, Arnold, a little bit of Annapolis, there was 9 incidents. Southern district, which is some of Annapolis, Edgewater, Shadyside, Deal, the further down you go on Route 2, there was 4. And then our western district, which borders Howard County, we're talking about the Severn, Crofton, Odenton, that area, there was 4 incidents. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now with the snapshot of our reports for this year.
Okay, thank you, Major Goodwin. Can you tell us a little, before I go any further with that, does anybody have any questions or need a little more clarity on the data in the report?
Yes, I have a question regarding the reporting. How do you all go and when there are incidents that happen on social media, when people threaten, and do you all use that as a reporting mechanism as well, collecting data as well?
Yeah, I can tell you a lot, probably a majority of our case. Unfortunately, we're in that world of social media. So I would say we ramped up with those incidents because of social media. Kids are putting things on the Snapchat, on Instagram, whether they're using a derogatory word, they have a symbol in the background. Anytime someone takes offense to that, I can tell you a lot of times, and most of those we get through the schools, they'll call us and we jump right on those. It's an investigation that we look into. And that's the unique thing. And the thing I'm so proud about our department is how we handle these. There's a lot of agencies that don't put a lot of clout into investigating something that's an incident, unless it involves a crime. We investigate an incident, regardless if it was a crime or not, as if it was a criminal investigation. So for those incidents where it's on social media and somebody, a child or a juvenile, uses a derogatory word or makes a threat using a derogatory word, We have detectives that actually work long hours trying to get to the source of where that came from, all the way to the end. And once we find out who that student or juvenile was or individual, they will go out to the residence, they will talk to the juvenile, they will talk to the parent, they will talk to the adult, which is why we've also incorporated a lieutenant responding to every one of these incidents. Our lieutenants are our highest ranking official on a shift at any given time. There's only 3 other incidents in our department where a lieutenant has to respond to a scene. That's for a homicide, a barricade hostage situation, or for an officer that's been involved with a domestic violence. This incident requires a lieutenant to respond to speak to the victim, which is how important these types of incidents are for our department. So yeah, social media is a whole new ballgame for us. It's really hard. It takes a lot of time backtracking to where that original source came from. Kids are really smart when it comes to social media. They know how to impose things. They know how to screenshot things. It's a whole different game for us with trying to track those down, but we take them very seriously, and we do pretty good with tracking down the original source.
Well, I have one more question. I'm sorry, Georgia. Just one more. I wasn't
John, before
specifically
you
talking.
go,
Okay.
we got a little bit of lag in between, so if you could speak up, and then when
Okay.
we're done, Tony, I'm recognizing you, and then Alana, then you. Go ahead,
Can you
John.
hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't specifically talking about kids, but I'm glad that you did bring that out as well. But I was mainly talking about adults. And of course, it looks like from the data there has been 9 in Pasadena. And of course, on the incidents that were happening last week, I think with the march that was preceding, there was a whole lot of things that were being said.
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons why some of the community, even the people who lived in the community, feared from coming from some of the things that were said. So that's why I was saying, how is, do you all look at that as a serious incident, or as,
Yes. So I'm so glad you brought that specific incident up. So when those threats started coming out, we have a group out of our Homeland Security, and they have actual detectives and civilians that do nothing but that social media where they're looking for threats. They're following up on things for us. As soon as we started getting those threats, they jumped right on it. They were pretty quickly able to identify who that person was that was making those posts. As soon as they identified that person, they went right out to his residence, knocked on the door, had a face-to-face, just to make sure that the threats weren't going to actually come about. They have to vet. A lot of times we know people will make a threat and there's no real means for them carrying it out, but they have to pretty much evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. So once they talked to the individual that made those threats, they realized that he had no intentions on carrying out anything. I think it helped with the face-to-face that he realized that we knew who he was and when we were watching him. So yes, we do that all the time. I wish we had more detectives that we could have social media intervention, but we get a lot of those kind of cases when it comes to that. It takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of hours to find out who it is, but we follow up with them with a face-to-face conversation to find out if it's a true threat or not.
All right, Tony, the floor is yours.
How many of those incidents were school related?
So unfortunately, not many. There was only one because I think it was such a short school year. If I'm looking at it real quick, it was 1 for 2020. I can tell you though that if you look back in 2019, which I sent out too, you'll see the big difference. I would say a majority of ours come from the schools, or something that happened in the school, I should say.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, I think statewide, 33% of all of our incidents were in the schools. So that tells you something.
Yeah, a third of those cases.
Yeah.
Okay. Major Goodwin, let's see. Oh, Alana, you were next, and then I have a question. Go ahead, Alana.
Thank you. Major Goodwin, and actually you kind of touched on this a bit as far as 2019, the number of incident cases. Could you just, what were the numbers again, and as far as the total year count?
For 2019?
Correct.
Yeah, so 2019, we had 83 total incidents that we reported. Just a quick breakdown that I did, there was 50 verbal intimidations, which, like I said, that's the majority of what we see is the verbal intimidations. There was 27 of those involved a crime, 56 were just an incident. And then the race breakdown, there was 72 that was race related, 63, the victim was Black, 4 Hispanics, and then 6 white victims.
Okay, thank you. And in the 2019, because I agree with you as you made the hypothesis, that the numbers for this current year being most likely slightly look reduced in comparison because of the pandemic and COVID-19 and whatnot. But going back to the numbers and tapping off of what Commissioner Tony Pratt asked, do you have a breakdown, a more specific breakdown as to the number of student concerns, incidents involving students in the schools for 2019?
Yes, it's on that spreadsheet, Ms. Lund. I'll be honest, out of the 83, I didn't get a chance to count up how many schools, but I can just tell on the first page where there's 31 listed. 1, 2, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. There's 19 out of 31, and that's just on page 1 of 3.
Right. I just wanted to, I didn't have it in front of me at the present time, but I just wanted to
I will say that's where most of our incidents occur, unfortunately, are in the schools and with the juveniles, because I don't think they have the maturity to understand what they're saying. And they're using words very loosely, not knowing the meaning and the hurt that goes behind them. And that's, part of the battle that we're making right now is that education piece.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing as well with regards to that when I receive the copies of the incident reports, at least of the past 2019. Next question, which will be the last question that I have, relates. I know the answer, but I don't want to make the assumption that everyone on the call knows the answer. So when you have incidents, hate bias incidents that do not rise to the level of a crime, how do you, or let me go back and rephrase the question, do you instruct your officers, when appropriate, to refer some of these cases to mediation, conflict resolution?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we had a great meeting with Miss Georgia probably before all the COVID happened. And so now our officers have all been instructed when they go out there. She gave us these nice little rip-offs, just good little pamphlet that officers can keep with them. So when they respond to these types of calls, and it's really anything like a neighbor dispute, but specifically these types of incidents where is that verbal intimidation, we rip it off and we ask both parties to please contact her office for that mediation. We know that in order to fix this problem, you got to get to the root cause of the problem, and it comes down to educating people. There's a lot of ignorant people in this world, and specifically in this county, and until they understand the true meanings behind these words and how hurtful they are and how much hatred there is behind it, they're going to continue using them. So until we can educate them and tell them about the history and the reason why it's offensive, we're not going to see a change in their behavior. And that's why I'm really proud with how we handle our juveniles. It's not about issuing a juvenile citation. We really want to hit that restorative justice piece. And that's really how we handle the juveniles, is that issuing a juvenile citation is not going to do any good. We want to correct the behavior. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is by teaching them and educating them and showing them what their actions are doing and how it's so hurtful. But we got to change that mindset, and we got to make kids more aware of the things that come out of the mouth. We all grew up with sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's not true. That's not true. And names do hurt. And they need to understand that. And that's part of our job, is that educational piece. And I think we do a really good job, especially with our school resource officers. They really take that on heads on with bringing students together, that this student has beef with the other one. They know charging both aren't going to do anything good. But when I bring them into my office and they sit down, they talk to them, they say, hey, you tell me what this word means to you. You tell me what this word means to you. How does it make you feel? When they start talking and having that dialogue, and they start connecting those dots, and they see this is a real person I'm talking to that has feelings, that starts that conversation and that awareness. And that's what our school resource officers are really good at doing right now with the kids.
Excellent. Thank you.
Major Goodwin, I want to thank you and specifically the chief for inviting members of various organizations to join the United Black Clergy to do your community engagement walks and to be engaged. I think that's something that's making a major difference in Anne Arundel County right now. And I would encourage you to expand upon those. I know that they're also participating in the food distributions as well. but to give the rest of the commission kind of a full 180 of what's happening with the police department. As Alana mentioned, in those situations where Major Goodwin sees whether it is an adult or a child, I know that in particular, Pastor Watts, your question was about adults. If they do rise to the level of a criminal charge, those cases are referred to the state's attorney's office. But we also have in DJS, Andrea McKinnon, who's working with ourselves, working with Tamika Perkins in the police department, working with the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families on a diversion program for community conferencing. So if it's a youth, that individual is asked, they're not forced to, they're offered the opportunity to participate in mediation, and that could be any number of restorative practices. If they choose not to do that, then of course they may face some other type of charge. But I believe that the role of the commission, as all of this is kind of pulled together, is to stay engaged. And one of the duties that we have in kind of, I guess, something that we've inherited is this concept of mediation. And so I think it's important that we continue to put that out there in the community to offer people the opportunity to engage. As it relates to the SROs in the schools, we're not sure what next year is going to look like. So I've already proactively pushed my staff to work with the police department, with the restorative justice circles, and with the equity office to make sure that all of the data that we gathered during our hate bias incident forum, that those facilitations, people that participated in that they're given the opportunity to join any number of the eliminating the achievement gap ETOG subcommittees. There's one on discipline, there's one on racial justice. I think it's a total of like 5, systemic racism. And the reason that it makes sense to have people kind of at least start there is these are the very same issues and topics that our people in those facilitation groups talked about. Many of them talked about what's happening in schools. Many of them talked about what's happening in the communities. And so that we're not allowing that really good work and information they shared with us just to kind of fall on deaf ears. I think it's important that we engage those people directly, give them the opportunity to join one of those groups if they want to, but at the same time, continue to engage them in some upcoming activities. And Alana is going to talk a little bit more about those. But I want to say thank you again, Kate, for joining us. Appreciate it. We look to have you back. One of the things that we asked was that in light of everything that's happening, I know we initially talked about a quarterly report, but if we, and thank you for graciously agreeing to do this, if we see an uptick in these types of things, we'd love to be able to have you come back on a monthly basis and work with us in separate groups to talk about what can we do to help impact the work that the police department is doing.
I would be more than happy to join you every month. We've said this all along that no one person, no one agency, no one commission can solve this problem. It's going to take everyone working together on it. So I think the more we have working on it, the better off we're going to be. So I would be absolutely pleased to be invited to your next meeting or your monthly meetings.
Absolutely. Mary, you had a question, and then we're going to go into our training because Lanita is on the line waiting patiently for us.
I'm so sorry. Captain Goodwin, I can get in touch with you separately, but I want to make the commission aware of some connections too. You're on the Ending the Opportunity Gap committee with me, eliminating the opportunity gap. Seeing you there, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So I have referred several youth groups to you, and not the mediation, the fact that you pursue all bias incidents. You may be aware that recently, within the last 2 weeks, a group of youth set up an Instagram site where they gather every bit of social media bias and hate speech from students that they can find, and they're posting it. Now, this isn't to display it. I know there's a question of, my goodness, you're redisplaying it.
Mhm.
I've been through lectures like that. A number of us have. And the reason it's there is to get identification of the persons just posting it and the persons participating in it. Um, our observation has been that it was quiet for a long time, and then in the last month, it's really blossomed.
Mhm.
So if you're not aware of that Instagram site, I will make you aware of it if you wish
Please.
to monitor it. Okay, and
Please do.
I will continue to, in particular, have the NAACP Youth and College Division person stay in touch with you about it.
Absolutely.
What do you do when it's not AACPS? You know, the schools are they've done a lot around their bias language and behavior and their bullying resolutions and regulations and policies. But there are gaps where they can't reach into the county. They can't reach into private schools. They can't reach into homeschooling. And there's a question if they can reach into the summer. We're pushing on that too. But are you, as far as you know, our only resource for those gap areas?
No, so if I understand, are you talking about how we're reaching out to the youth during the summertime?
Sure. So if somebody does it in an in a county school during the school year, they're going to be hit with a mandatory training program through the school. That's the minimum they're going to have. Plus, it's going to be referred to you, and you're very likely going to show up as well. Not sure that mandatory school program is going to be able to be put in place during the summer break, and definitely not if it's somebody who's attending a private school.
Yeah, so we have, I don't know if anyone's met Miss Tamika Perkins, who is our juvenile. Yeah. So I wish we had 100 of her. So that's what she does every day, all the time. She reviews anything that has to involve with the juvenile. And there's so many diversion programs that she has that she oversees. And that's exactly what we do. So what those programs that you see in the schools, we're doing also in the county. Outside the school system. Sometimes we work in partnership with the schools and their programs, but we have our own programs also in place. But that's her job and she loves it. And that's what she's phenomenal at is referring those types of cases to one of our diversion programs.
Even if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It's two parts. They recognize a lot of it is a health issue, a mental health issue, where there's more that's going on with that kid. Now, once a kid is issued a juvenile citation, especially for a first offense, all those go to Ms. Tamika. And I will say most of the time it goes into one of our diversion programs. But we also have our mobile crisis unit that works very closely with kids in need, trying to get them into those programs as well. So we have, I want to call it like a wraparound. When a kid's in need, we have this wraparound, whereas our mobile crisis folks, our crisis intervention team, Ms. Tamika Perkins, we wrap around this kid and we figure out what is their need. Is there substance abuse going on? Is there domestic violence going on in that house that they're looking at? Is there mental health? And we hook them up with the right resource to get them on that right track.
So just to add to that, Mary, and we'll end the discussion. Tamika is a member of a coalition called RED, and it used to be DMC, Disproportionate Minority Contact. It's a coalition of organizations and agencies that do what they can to divert kids from the juvenile justice system, that truly closing the school to prison pipeline. It's called RED now, which is Racial and Ethnic Diversity. And so we work together for students in private schools, you name it. And during the summer, it doesn't stop. It's full year round.
And you're part of that as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
One thing I have to say, because I brag about this all the time, and I'm so proud, but last summer, we weren't able to do it this summer, but we have a crisis intervention team, which is our CIT officers at camp. And these were the kids that were constantly being charged or constantly in trouble, whether it was at school or at home. So it was kind of the worst of the worst kids, but had a lot of issues going on in the home front because of their parents or their environment. And we brought them to camp for the summer. And it was just spectacular to see these kids in the relationship with our police officers, with our mobile crisis folks. And at the end of it, these are kids that we haven't had an issue with ever since, because we wrapped around them. We brought them into another experience. And to this day, we have relationships with these kids, and it's worked out brilliantly. I wish we could have done it this summer, but with COVID, we weren't able to do it. So we're being creative with other things we can do. But that's not going to stop. We're going to continue those kind of camps also. There's kids that really need it, get them on the right track.
Okay.
My final concern is what kind of parental support are you getting?
Parental?
Right. When you show up at the door, are the parents saying, leave my kid alone? They have every right to think this way, or are they cooperating?
Some are definitely cooperative and are absolutely, yep, let's do whatever we need to get my kid on the right track. Some are ignorant. That's probably where some of the kids learn that behavior. So we have to try to fix that behavior with the parents also. I can tell you an example with a kid that we sent for restorative justice. He used a slang word towards a Jewish population. We sent him to the Holocaust Museum and we sent the parents there because we knew he was learning that behavior from the parents. So we were trying to reach the parents also to change their behavior because if we don't get to the parents, it's hard to get to the kids. So we try to do it twofold a lot of the times. But I would say it's mixed. It's mixed.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Thank you, Mary. Last question, Pastor Watts. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Is it Sergeant Goodwin?
Major Goodwin, but you
Major
can call me
Goodwin.
Katie, please.
Thank you, Major Goodwin. I really appreciate you. I met you before, talked to you before,
Yes.
and you have an amazing personality. And
Thank you.
I feel all the grace and goodness that comes from you.
Oh,
I do
thank
have
you.
a workforce question. I believe it's a workforce question as it relates to training officers. I
Mhm.
raised this question before. And this was a question that was raised in a meeting about the COVID and the summertime coming, and a lot of people being diverted in different areas of the community. People traditionally coming out of their communities, going into other communities for hiking, for bike riding, so it's going to be a lot of uh, uh, shifting and moving around in different spaces. My question before was, have your officers been trained when they start getting calls or an elevation of calls happening with different people or different group of people showing up in the space that traditionally have not been spaces that are visited by different groups, and how that approach, being given a call and say, hey, you have a group of kids in this hiking trail, hanging out or whatever, never seen them before. The kids get agitated because they're approached by an officer.
Mhm.
How have your officers been trained or even given that information of how to deal with that? Maybe if they get some kind of pushback from the group or from a group of people or whatever, saying, I feel like I'm being violated because you are here.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah,
what I
so
mean? So
we get a lot of training on that, and that goes really back to community-oriented policing, talking, not just going out there. And I've said it before, and I'll say it till I leave this agency. The youth, especially the juveniles that we're dealing with on a day-to-day, have got to see our officers in a different light. They have to stop seeing our police officers going into their communities and locking up their family members and their friends and their loved ones and putting handcuffs on them. They have to see those positive engagements. So we teach the officers to turn it around. When you run up on a group of juveniles, ask them what they're doing. How are you doing? Start that dialogue. It's those social skills that we come back to, but it comes back to the approach and how we talk to people and listening to people. It's no different how we treat adults. You have to treat juveniles like that as well. And we teach our officers at every interaction that they have, whether they're an adult, whether they're a juvenile, whether they're Black, whether they're white, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're female, whether they're male, whoever they interact with, you talk to them like it's one of your family members. And you create that positive engagement. Every interaction we have, it should be a positive one. It should be a positive interaction. And they have to start seeing our police officers in a different light where we're not there to lock them up. Yes, we might have to be called out to see what's going on with them. But once we see they're not doing anything but other than hanging out or playing basketball, I can tell you there's plenty of times where my officers have gotten out of their cars and started playing basketball with the kids. That's what we need to see. A lot of these kids, they're not up to no good. They're just hanging out in a group. But I will say there's a lot of people that will call in as soon as they see a group of kids, they think they're up to no good. So they'll call the police. And yes, we have to come out and respond. But it's how we react and it's how we interact with that group. And we go over this a lot with our training with our officers, is those positive engagements that we have to create and that dialogue, talking to them, getting to know them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But thank you very, very much. Tony, did you have a question or a comment?
A comment. I just wanted to reiterate what you just said about when you go into the communities. You want to make it a positive community. And that goes back to the biases. In some communities, when police come, it is a pleasant atmosphere. But in other communities, it's not so pleasant. And we witness that all the time, over and over. And I understand what you're saying, that people have to start looking at police different, but the police also have to start looking at people in certain communities different.
Could not agree with you anymore. And I will say we have to invest in those communities that need it the most. And I can tell you in the last 5 years, we've done a really good job with that. We do a lot of things with these kids. We take them to baseball games. We take them to the museum. We take them to the ballet. We take them to the Kennedy Center, to the kids that need it, to the kids that would never have an opportunity if it wasn't for us taking it to them. And then that's our opportunity to engage with them. When we play kickball with them, play basketball with them, there's so many things that we're doing now. And I will say it's in those communities that need it the most, but that's where we have to build the trust. That's where most of our trust is broken, and is in those communities. So I can tell you, we spend with our youth activities program, that's where we gear all our resources, are to those communities that there is a lack of trust with the police. And it's our job to start building that trust. And that's why we invest a lot of our time in those communities and doing activities with them. And we're not going to stop.
Major Goodwin, one of the things we're going to have to end on that. We would love for you to come back next month, because it seems like this conversation could go on a little bit longer. And I know, based upon the meeting that Eugene had and the feedback that I've received and talked with Chief, we do want to talk a little bit more about funding. And I think that that's going to be key. As we move forward, we talk about how we interact, police officers, and that relationship with the community. There needs to be some sort of investment in that, so we can talk a little bit more about how that's going to work. So thank you for your time. We appreciate you. And if you'd like to go ahead and depart from us at this moment,
Sure.
Please feel free, because we're going to move into our training section of our meeting.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to next month being here.
Always, always.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Faye. And Faye can introduce our special guest. And if you need me to share the screen, Lanita, please just let me know, okay? Faye?
Okay. Thank you. I just want to welcome Lanita Hillen, who is the Director of Housing Services for the Housing Commission of Anne Arundel County. Ms. Hillen, thank you for making yourself available to us. I mean, we changed the schedule and time on you several times, and thank you for your patience and here with us. Thank you very much for being here.
So I don't know if everyone received the PowerPoint that I sent out, or if it would be easier just to share it, or if you've had a chance to review it, if you would prefer to just ask questions. I guess I need to know what's best for those who are on the call.
I think at this point, if you could just share it with everyone, that would probably be the easiest thing. I'll go ahead and set the screen up to share, okay?
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Where are you here? Okay.
Well, before she starts, can she just share a little bit about herself? Because this is my first time. I don't know who she is.
Yeah. Yeah. Ms. Hilton, you can do both. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hilton.
I am, well, this shows the bill that's up.
Okay, let me see here. I think you have to, it's a new share. Let's see here. Okay, do you have something up that you'd like to?
I have a PowerPoint on my computer to share. Let's see if it says I cannot start a screen share while the other participants are sharing.
Let me do this. Let me stop this share.
Okay.
And make sure that I've got, did I do this incorrectly? Hold on, let me see. I think I have to give who can share. All panelists who can share, starting with, okay. Okay, now you should be able to go ahead and you do the screen share.
Okay, let me minus this one out. Let's see if it will do this. There it goes. Share. There.
You have it at the very bottom where it says screen share?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so I'm sorry, you asked for me to tell you a little bit about myself. Um, I work with the Housing Commission of Anne Arundel County. I've been with the agency since 2004, and I have worked in all aspects of housing with the Housing Commission. I've worked in public housing, started as an assistant property manager, moved up very quickly to a property manager, and then senior property manager, assistant director, and then director of property management. Um, After about 12 years, I decided it was a chance to learn the other side of what we do, which was the Section 8 program. So I dove into that, and it's been exciting. It's been a change as opposed to being out on the properties, um, along with learning about development and our boutique programs and how our development goes hand in hand with the Section 8 program and all of the other uh, agencies that work with us to provide housing for some of our special populations. So, you know, I've been there. I continue to learn, and the reason that I started with housing was because I'd like to make a difference with people. So I have a background of working in the hospital. I did financial counseling for self-pay patients. So I'm used to working with people who are low income or maybe targeted because of a disability, um, not having the funds to necessarily pay for housing or health care. And I felt like those roles were very similar. And I had the opportunity when I worked in healthcare to make a difference for lower income families then to provide the assistance that they needed. So it was a transition between the two. So that's how I got started with the Housing Commission. Any other questions? Okay. So what I provided to you is the housing choice voucher information session. This is something that we generally do with our landlords. I usually hold at least 2 what we call landlord symposiums a year. And we invite different landlords, we invite realtors. We have a few landlords who we've been able to bring on board who were very instrumental in providing housing, in particular for persons with disabilities. Because if they don't know there's a need, then they don't know to provide what we need. So that worked out really well. A lot of our landlords don't understand the overall goal of the Housing Commission. They think we're a county entity. We're not a county entity. We are privately owned. We receive subsidy from both the federal government and some of the county agencies. So we have partnerships with ACDS, with the county executive, with the ARC of Central Chesapeake, with Department of Social Services, Sarah's House. So we have partnerships with lots of agencies throughout the county who do get funds from the county. And so a lot of people think that we are a county entity. Like I said, we are privately owned. Our goal, of course, is to provide quality housing for low-income families or for persons who need supportive services. So that's where some of our boutique programs come into play. Our boutique programs are probably some of my favorite programs because those are the ones where we make the biggest difference in the lives of people who wouldn't otherwise be served. We have supportive housing programs. We have transitional housing partnerships with Lighthouse and with Sarah's House. We have a couple of partners who have programs particularly for persons with disabilities. So they provide single room occupancy for those families I call them families, but those individuals to live together and provide supportive services. So it excites me when we're able to provide housing for some of our special need clients, in addition to our families too. And then even with our families, we are focused on providing supportive services on our properties in our public housing. And all of our public housing at this time is transitioning. So we have some public housing, we have some that's converting to what they call RAD, which is the rental assistance demonstration. So that means that we're going to have a mix of incomes and a mix of subsidies on our properties. Whereas like Mead Village just went to settlement. That will now be project-based vouchers, and they will be low-income housing tax credits, and then we'll have some market rate units. So the overall goal is to get a mix of incomes into the communities so that our communities aren't targeting or aren't just comprised of low-income families. We'd like to get a mix of incomes and higher incomes so that the quality of life on the properties is sustained by all who live there. So I've gone through our goals, kind of just talking about all of our properties, but our overall goal is to improve the quality of the lives of the tenants who live on our property. We also have a self-sufficiency program, which is a family self-sufficiency program. It's a 5-year program. It has a 5-year goal. And we have families who will sign up for this program, and they go from getting degrees, increasing their education. Sometimes the goal is to pay off debt. The other thing is that when they join this program, if they have a rent, no rent, or a low rent, the difference of their rent, if their rent increases, goes into an escrow account. So that escrow builds for the time that they're in our program. We have had very successful clients who have gone on to purchase homes. Some have even earned their way out of the program because they have become over income, which is great. We've had people earn master's degrees, people get their GEDs, people who have just been able to get a better job because they've been able to get those degrees or their diploma, and take their money, maybe buy a car, pay off their bills. So the program really, really works. And then the other thing with the Family Self-Sufficiency Program is, depending on completing your goals, you could qualify for the home ownership program if that's one of your goals. Completing the program through ACDS and doing the home ownership training. That program is also available to persons with disabilities. So we have families with disabilities who may qualify for home ownership where the voucher pays part of our mortgage. So that has allowed quite a few of our families to become homeowners too. The county, in passing the Fair Housing Bill that they passed earlier this year, has been wonderful for our agency. It goes right with our equal opportunity for housing, whereas you can't discriminate for race, color, religion, national origin, disability, all of the things that we've been fighting for affirmatively furthering fair housing. And we didn't have a fair housing bill in Anne Arundel County, so it was great when we were able to finally get that bill passed. And we were able to tell clients who were looking for housing that a landlord could not deny them the opportunity to rent a unit just because they had a voucher. So the voucher can be used as a source of income. The Housing Commission and all of the agencies that we work with are very focused on the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which would include providing access to community assets for persons protected by Fair Housing Act, overcoming segregated living patterns. So what we try to do with the segregated living patterns, although our communities have been in place for a very long time, when we change our communities, if, for example, Heritage Overlook, with the mix of subsidies that we include, We had Weinberg that was added in, so those were specifically for persons with disabilities. We changed it from just a senior community to a community that included families. So making sure that we bring in a mix of families and persons into our communities is very important. Supporting and promoting integrated communities goes along with that, and ending racial and ethnical concentration areas of poverty. So, we can't change where we own our properties, but with each property where we have additional land, we have been building additional units. We have changed how we do our wait list. Our wait list used to be based upon, if you lived in Anne Arundel County, if you were elderly, if you were a veteran, if you worked in Anne Arundel County. We had several preferences, and some of those preferences were weighted, and we had people who were on those wait lists for a very long period of time, sometimes based solely on their income, because there was somebody who was in greater need based solely on income. Our wait list has been changed to date and time. So the people who were at the end of our wait list for many, many years, some of them 12, 15 years, based upon the date and time of their application, have gone to the top of the wait list. And it's given them a greater opportunity to be able to find housing through our programs too. I do have information on what we highlight when our clients are looking for housing, and also with our landlords. So the information that you see highlighted here actually explains Bill 5519 and what the law states and how it's clearly defined, that you cannot discriminate, what discrimination means. And we give them a copy of the bill when the landlords come in for their orientation. We also give them a copy of the handout that was provided before the bill was actually enacted, so that they can see what the bill actually covers and what it doesn't cover, and what the penalties are if they discriminate against a family who is seeking housing. The other information that we provide for our families is the information below, that if they feel as though they have been violated, that their rights have been violated, that they can contact HUD. We give them the HUD website, and we give them a phone number. We give them that in their briefing packet that we give them when they come in for their orientation. So what is a housing choice voucher? The housing choice voucher is a subsidy that pays the difference of what a family pays towards their rent. Our families who initially qualify can pay anywhere between 30% and 40% of their adjusted income for their shelter. We give them a maximum that they can lease towards, and I provided samples towards the back that I can, kind of tie this in a little bit later. But their rent, when they're looking for rent, we let them know that it must include their rent plus their utilities for them to be able to qualify. All types of housing are allowed under this program, except for hotels. So owner-occupied units are not eligible except under extenuating circumstances. I've had an owner who rented a room to a person who had a disability, and he would assist her with reading her mail. She was blind. So reading her mail, he got a special stove for her. He provided all those different things that she needed. So we were able to get a special accommodation as a reasonable accommodation for a person. So they're handled on a case-by-case basis based upon a need for a person with a reasonable accommodation. The other thing is that the Hqs Checklist, which is the Housing Quality Standards Checklist, is also provided to the landlords to let them know the things that have to be met for the unit to pass an inspection. So when we give them their landlord handbook, it has that checklist to tell them these things, must be working, must be operational, must exist in your unit in order for a family to lease from you. And then we tell them about the three-way partnership that we have and the roles of the tenant, the landlord, and the housing agency. For the tenant, They just have to sign a lease when they initially get their voucher for at least 1 year. So once they lease with us for at least 1 year, they can take their voucher and they can move anywhere. If they want to stay within the county, they can. If they want to port to another county, another state, they are more than welcome to take their voucher, if it's a regular voucher, and move anywhere that they want to after their first year of leasing in our county. And we have some families who want a voucher just to be able to do that and then move to be close to family. So it works out well for them. Tenant may be required to pay a security deposit to the landlord. Housing Commission does not have assistance to help with security deposits, but we do have service coordinators who provide resources if someone tells us that they need help with security deposits. Also, Department of Social Services has worked with us quite a bit with that. If the tenant can get their security deposit, they'll pay first month's rent if the tenant qualifies for that subsidy. So the family just has to comply with the lease, and they have to maintain their unit in good condition in order to be able to remain on the program. So the landlords expect that the Housing Commission does a lot that a landlord is expected to do. And we have to review that with them. We let them know that, they do have, their unit has to pass the Hqs inspection, and that they're supposed to provide the services that are agreed to in the lease. A lot of times we'll get phone calls and it'll be that the tenant has done something to violate their lease, and we have to let them know that's a landlord-tenant issue. And if it's not in violation of our program, that the tenant is still entitled to their voucher, that we wouldn't terminate them. The voucher is only terminated for serious or repeated violations of the lease or of the voucher program. Everyone makes mistakes, so we like to give people chances, unless it's something, that's drug related, if it's a lifetime sex offender, or if it's a violent criminal activity. Those activities, they're still entitled to a hearing, but those are the things that are more serious in nature that we usually have to have hearings for. And then the Housing Commission's obligations, of course, are to provide the family with the housing assistance that allows them to look for housing, that we enter into a contract with the landlord. And we explain to them, we have a contract with you and you have a contract with the tenant. And if the landlord fails to meet the obligations of the lease, then we terminate our contract with the landlord and we issue the tenant a voucher to move. And then we must re-examine the family's income at least annually. So the families have to recertify at least annually and turn in all their income information so that we can redetermine the rent amount that would be charged for the family. How the voucher works. We pull people from the wait list, which means that once your time and date comes up on the wait list, we call in a pool of people who come in for orientation. They would then at that time bring in their updated income information, and we pull a criminal background to make sure that they're eligible. And if everything goes well and they turn in all their documents, we issue them a voucher that is based upon their family composition at the time that they come in for their orientation. Once the family selects a unit, then we would schedule an inspection, and we would make sure that the family income qualifies for the unit. So we give them what's called an RFTA, which is a request for tenancy approval. They give that to the landlord. The landlord fills it out. They have to fill in the rent, the utilities, the security deposit, when it will be available for inspection. And when we get that RFTA back, we check for rent reasonableness, which means we check to make sure that the landlord is not overcharging for comparable units that are in the area. So when we calculate the rent, we have to make sure that the rent's comparable. We make sure that the rent is in comparison with the payment standard, and that the family is not going to be paying more than 30 to 40% for their rent. If it exceeds the 30 to 40%, then the family wouldn't qualify for the unit that they've selected. So rent reasonableness, I mentioned that when we initially get the request for tenancy, we check rent reasonableness before entering to what's called a housing assistance payment contract with the landlord. And then if the landlord wants to ask for an increase, the landlord can ask for an increase after the first anniversary date, but the rent cannot be more than what's being paid as a fair market rent at the time that they request the increase. We also have the right to decrease the rent if there is a significant change or a drop in the payment standards. We don't have that happen too often, but if a tenant is complaining that they feel like their rent is too high, we will go in and we'll reassess and check to see that the fair market rents in the area haven't dropped more than 5%. Because then we do have the right to reduce the rent that the landlord is actually charging. And then comparability, when we check the units, we check the location, quality, size, unit type, and age of the contract unit. So basically like for like units, and we check the amenities, the maintenance, the utilities, and what the owner will provide for the unit. So if it's a single family home, if it's a 3-bedroom house, we're checking for a 3-bedroom house. A lot of times in the search engines, you can put in, the age of the house. So we'll usually check for age of the house or in a certain neighborhood if it's not the same landlord, just to get comparable units. And we use sites like Zillow, Redfin, any of those sites, and apartments.com for a lot of the apartments, or other search engines that we can use to compare those rates. So terminations, the families can terminate their tenancy after the initial term. So terminations during the initial term are allowed, but only if the landlord agrees to it. And if the family has given notice of the termination in accordance with the lease, then a voucher would be reissued for them to move. Termination of tenancy by the owner. The owner must only terminate the lease in accordance with the lease provisions. And again, only for serious or repeated violations of the lease, violation of the law, criminal activity, or alcohol abuse. And they say for other good cause, and other good cause could be, that they just don't follow what the lease is stating, that they may have unauthorized occupants, that they may have an unauthorized pet. They may just decide that they don't want to renew the lease after 1 year because they want to use the home for themselves. They're entitled to do that as long as it's in accordance with the lease and it's not for any fair housing reasons that they're terminating the lease. Terminations for other good cause. Examples are disturbing neighbors, destroying property, not having good housekeeping habits. A lot of times when we run into that, if the landlord lets us know and it's a family that has special needs or a person with disabilities, we'll try and find resources for them if we're made aware of it in advance, so that we can try and get someone in to assist the family so that they can maintain their housing. This does happen, not too often, but it does happen sometimes for our families who are disabled and not able to always care for their units in the manner that the landlord expects them to care for it. So it's basically mediating the need and stating, that we can get assistance in to help the family. So after the initial term, family not accepting an offer for a new lease revision. So if the landlord wants to raise the rent and the tenant says no, and we say that it's not a comparable rent, and the landlord decides to leave the program, we don't have a choice. The family has to be issued a voucher to move. That the owner may want to use the unit for personal use or for business reasons, or to renovate the unit so that they can request a higher rent. Notification requirements must be in accordance with the lease, and the landlord must give the tenant written notice for their reason that they want to terminate, and they must give them appropriate notice. We usually ask the landlords to give them at least 60 days although a lot of the leases only state 30 days, but most of the landlords do comply with us and give them at least 60 days if they decide not to renew. And notice must be given to the tenant before any eviction process starts. If they get an eviction notice, it is mandatory that the voucher is terminated. So a lot of times we will try and get them eviction help so that they're not evicted. We'll refer them to different agencies to help them to get the money together so that they're not evicted. It is a mandatory regulation that if a family is evicted, that the voucher is also terminated. Again, they're entitled to a hearing though if that does happen. So at least if we terminate, the family is entitled to come in and plead their case before our hearing officer before anything is finalized. And we also tell our landlords, of course, about the advantages of being on the program, that they have rent security. So we have a family who comes in who's paying rent and their rent is, $500, and then they lose their job. Well, the landlord has a security that if the family loses their job and they report it to us, that we're going to pay more of the rent so that the landlord isn't without the funds. So we always tell them, that's pretty much security that you're always going to be paid as long as the tenant reports any changes in their income. They get to list their properties with us, so it helps to fill their vacancies. They have their choice of tenants. We do our screening, but we let them know that they should do their screening too, as long as it does not violate any fair housing law. So they can decide that they want to deny someone based upon a criminal background if they want to, or based upon rental references if they want to, as long as it is not in violation of fair housing law. I talked about the tenant suffers any financial hardship. And of course, we come out and we inspect the unit. So we inspect it upon move-in, and then we inspect it at least every other year once they pass their first annual inspection. We do advise the landlords that they should go in at least quarterly or twice a year to inspect their units to make sure that, if there are things that need to be fixed before we get in there, that they're not hit with lots of violations that could delay payment on their behalf. In tenant screening, the landlords or owners may only calculate the applicant's income qualifications in accordance with what they're going to pay. So we had tenants who were telling us, well, they say I have to make 3 times the rent in order to qualify. So you've got a rent of $3,000 and a rent of $1,000, and the landlord's telling you, you have to make $3,000 a month in order to qualify for this unit. Well, with the fair housing law and with the way that the tenant rent is calculated, we've explained to the landlords, you can only expect the tenant to make 3 times their portion of the rent. So if the tenant's portion of the rent is $100, their monthly income only needs to be $300 a month, their portion. So we had to go through educating the landlords with that. You can't expect a tenant to have the income unless you're going to count the income from their voucher too to qualify for a unit and have an income that's 3 times the amount of your rent. Tenant screening and selection, we've told them, is the responsibility of the owner. We can give them the current and prior address on record with the housing authority, and we can give them the name and address known of the prospective tenant's current landlord. We encourage them to check the family's background regarding their rental history, their care of the unit, respect of the rights of others around them, any drug-related criminal activity that threatens the health and safety of the property or others around them, and compliance with their lease. The landlords don't always follow that, and then they want to blame us when they haven't done their due diligence, but we tell the tenants the same thing. You're going to rent a unit, go look at the unit. Go ride by several different times a day. Go look at it on the weekend. Go look at it during the day. Go look at it at night. So it goes both ways. You want to rent a unit, and then all of a sudden you've moved in and you say, well, I don't like the neighborhood at night. Well, we advise you to go check it out at different times. You have just as much responsibility as the landlord does in selecting your unit. And we do have a relocation specialist who helps tenants find units too based upon their income and the areas that they want to move to.
Lanita, before you go any further, I just want to real quickly, this is all fascinating because I personally want to know more about how this process works. We have a hard stop at 7:15.
Okay.
I'm sorry, at 8:15. Actually, we'll be kicked off. So if you can kind of wrap us up, and then I'm sure we have questions, and then of course we need to make a decision about the rest of the reports as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I think I've gone over most of the major steps in becoming a landlord. Everything that's explained in the next slide is basically the documentation that has to be turned in by the landlord. And then the last part is just for them to set up a portal. So what I did provide in the slide, which a lot of people find interesting, is how we calculate the rent. I know this screen is really small, so I hope the copy that you were sent is a lot bigger. But all the yellow areas that you see here are filled in. Everything else auto-populates. And then based upon the gross rent and the payment standard, that determines if the tenant is going to pay more than their 30%. So I gave you one that's an actual match, where the tenant would actually meet the 40% and what the tenant rent would be. And then on the next slide, I've given you one where the tenant rent would be over. So on this one, the rent is slightly lower, and I can barely see it myself. I think it's $11.45. So I used the same unit, same utility, same income, and the family was able to lease at their 40%. On the next slide, I provided a scenario where they were over. So when the rent went to $1,300, it increased the gross rent to $1,450, which meant that the tenant was responsible for the difference between the gross rent and the payment standard. So that is the amount that they have to pay that's over their 30%. This family would have ended up paying 59% of their income towards rent. And according to HUD regulation, if they're paying more than 40% of their income, they're considered rent burden. So we don't allow them to initially lease up if their portion of the rent's going to be more than 40%. So this part of the step is really crucial in issuing a voucher and letting them know the amounts that they can lease. Mm-hmm. So when we give them a voucher, we give them this cover sheet that explains to them your payment standard. We tell them the maximum amount that we'll pay towards the subsidy. And then the bottom two lines that you see here, based upon the proposed rent, you can't exceed the $11.45 if your rent includes all of your utilities. If your rent doesn't include your utilities, then you're going to look for a unit that's going to rent for $1,295. So we have people who follow that guideline and some who don't. They come in and they'll say, oh, I want to rent a unit for $1,400, and they don't qualify because it's more than 40% of their income. So we do give them guidelines and let them know the amount that they can rent. And then we also give them an acknowledgement letter that tells them everything that has to be filled in on the RFTA, that it's going to take about 15 days from the time that they turn in their RFTA to request a unit, to get income qualified, make sure we get everything from the landlord, and make sure we get the inspection done. A lot of times the turnaround is probably about a week, but we give ourselves 14 to 15 days because HUD says we can take that amount of time. And just in case we have an influx of RFTAs, we don't want someone to think, oh, I'm going to get this completed in a week, when there are other people ahead of them who have turned in RFTAs prior to us receiving. So that's the last of the slides. So do you have any questions for me?
Okay. Can you unshare the screen and then we can see everybody that has their hand up?
Stop sharing. Okay.
Awesome. Any questions, comments, feedback? I did have a question for you, Lena, and I know I'm the first person to holler about us having a time, but this is important.
That's okay.
When you talked about criminal background check, what exactly I guess I'm more concerned with if a person does have a criminal background, are they eliminated from the voucher program? Are they eliminated from renting housing from the commission?
It depends on what the background is. So we have lots of clients who have criminal backgrounds. So the HUD regulation states that we check criminal background for the past 3 years. And what we're screening for is any drug-related criminal activity or any violent criminal activity, and any lifetime registered sex offenders. So what that means is if we pull a criminal background, and we have an agency who actually pulls ours for us, if we pull a criminal background and someone has been arrested 7 times in the last 3 years for possession of CDS, but all of them are null-prossed, then that person is still allowed to come into housing. So it used to be that if you were, even if you were arrested or cited, that you were not allowed to be in housing, but you have to be convicted in order for it to be held against you in the screening process. So usually if someone has a pattern or a habit of it, depending on who's reviewing the file, they could deny it, but we have 4 people who review the files. So you might get 3 yeses and 1 no, but the majority actually decides the eligibility. And the same thing with violent criminal activity. So if it's assault, if someone is null-prossed or if they're put on a stet, we're only looking at the past 3 years. We don't look at traffic. We don't look at, for the Section 8 program, we don't look at credit. We don't look at theft. So anything that's not violent or drug related, we don't even review it.
Okay. Yes, Pastor White, get your hand up. Go ahead.
First, I want to thank you for going over all of the information. It was great. One of the things I want to I love, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing this, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program.
Yes.
And so how, I know you explained, how it works. Well, who are the agencies, the other agencies and the other groups that you work with to make the GED, the master's program, to make this successful? I'm very interested in knowing that. I think, like, who are the partners that work together to really push and make sure those families are successful that would like to go, because I really would like to push that program in my area, to really get people, to feel like they have accomplished something. So who are the partnerships that you have in the community to make sure you get those certain families through this process successfully?
Well, we push the program too. We send out a notice with every annual recertification to let families know that the program is there. One of our biggest partners is the county executive's office. He's actually funded our Choices program. So money that we receive for our family self-sufficiency program can only be used for certain things. They can be used for staff, and they can be used for certain programs. But the county executive has given us funding that we can use so that some of our clients who needed, say, laptops, or they needed things that the family self-sufficiency program wouldn't pay for, if they needed books or they needed supplies to be able to go to school, the county executive actually gave us a grant that we use towards that. So we have a choices manager and 2 family self-sufficiency coordinators who actually coordinate with our different resources with, I know Arundel Medical Center, we've got North American Trade Schools. They're partnered with workforce development. We actually have workforce development on both of our sites prior to COVID at both Freetown and at Meade. Hopefully we'll be opening those back up again. But yeah, they have a huge list of resources, and I can put you in touch with Stephanie Nida, because there are way too many to list, and that's her niche. That's what she does.
Okay, thank you very much. Considering the time, what we may do, Lanita, if it's okay with you, we may have Tony and Khalid reach back to you to kind of finish this conversation because, you know, I would love to hear more about the Ross grants, those kind of things. If you all are clearly Pastor, I'm sure would like to volunteer his organization to help. So we appreciate you being on this call with us in this meeting. We thank you so much. Considering what we do with housing discrimination, I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the commissioners that I see a long-standing relationship and a need to use you as a resource.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Absolutely.
And what I'll do is also send out any information when I have symposiums again for landlords. If any, I can send the information to Faye or to Alana, so that if anyone would like to come and join in on the conversations with our landlords, I know legal aid usually attends, which is great. Because if they have legal questions, they can ask them. But I'll let you know the next time we have a symposium.
Please do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have, it is 8:05, you all, and like I said, we'll be cut off at 8:15. So at this point, we can do a couple of things. We have a number of reports to give. I would like for us to give at least 5 minutes to our HR, our statement that we made concerning the murder of George Floyd. And then after that, if we can cut to possibly, do an hour-long just follow-up meeting with the commission over the next week or so. I think that's going to be the only way that we get through the volume of business that we have here. By common consent, can we agree to do that?
So move.
Okay. I think I have to make a vote on that because I also wanted to go back. I failed to get a vote on tabling the report. So I'm going to ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Tony, I can't hear you. Okay, got you there. Okay. That being case passed. So Tony, if you could give us a real quick update, you and Faye, on the HRC statement on George Floyd's death, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so real quick, what we tried to do is to convey that as a commission that
you're gonna have to speak up, Faye. We can barely hear you.
Okay, I'm having problems with my phone, so maybe Tony can speak.
Tony?
We tried to convey the seriousness that the commission holds with any hate biases, any racism that's going on, and that we will stand against it as a commission. And that's what we try to portray in that letter.
It was very well written, by the way. I have to say, I didn't get an opportunity to place the edits in there, and the edits in particular had to do with specifically what George Floyd said. In that he specifically said, "Mama, mama." And that was the two very important words that we left out because the sentiment, and it's been spoken by several people, that he was aware that he was dying. And I think we all feel the same way, a sense of disgust, a sense of just enragement, rage, anger about the way that this occurred. But I'm glad to see that the protests have not stopped. And I think as a Human Relations Commission, the sheer mission of what we are, we cannot let up on this. We have to proactively do everything that we can that shows that we respect human life, that we will not stand for discrimination. We want equal treatment. I don't mean bad treatment. We want equal, just treatment. So thank you to Faye and Tony for working to get this statement put together. It is on our Facebook page. The statement is also on our website. Mark, I wanted to make sure that I try to get that edit over to you so that we can make sure that the new edit is in there There are only a slight couple of word differences, but it's important that those be added in. Tony and Faye, is there anything I'm missing?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. The only thing I wanted to add is that we had some ask of the county exec and the police, chief of police, to implement training to declare racism a public emergency, a public health emergency, to implement the 8 Can't Wait initiatives, which things that can happen without money, banning the chokehold, for instance, and de-escalating and requiring the police officers to make a statement that I'm about to shoot, whatever the case may be, banning them from shooting into moving vehicles, things of that nature. Trying to expedite getting the body-worn cameras. So there were some things that we did ask of those two do. And so I'm interested in hearing what Eugene had to say from his meeting with the police chief.
Right. And you're absolutely right. So just so the rest of the commission is aware, if you look at the statement, there's some very specific things that we asked for, action items in the statement, many of which Faye just talked about. Eugene had a meeting with the with the police chief. Eugene, we have 5 minutes.
Right, I'll go real quick.
Yeah, I want to spend some time on what you have to say. Go ahead.
I'll go real quick. I used that statement in the meeting. I went point by point through the statement. The biggest problem that the chief had, he's still struggling with the review board, the deadly force. They're going to rename their incident examination to deadly force conference. He cautioned and said we had to remember that that looks at incidents after the judicial decision has been made as to whether it was a justified shooting or not, and they look at training and other issues. He reiterated his support for modifying the Policeman's Bill of Rights, and he said they're going to stand with their position on that. In their training, they do de-escalation training in every phase of their training. They added 2 more hours to their academy, and that deals with de-escalation. Deals with bias training, etc. And he would like to see if we would either want to go to the police department and have the same presentation that I had, or even do a training for us through Zoom. So I thought it was a very productive meeting. I think there's a lot of agreement on things that we need, and he would also point out some areas of funding that he needs from the county executive to help with his mission to make Anne Arundel County the best place for all. And I will commit to putting something together in writing that goes through some of those points. I think we have, for instance, the largest dedicated training budget for the academy in the state, over in terms of hours, over 1,200 hours. The standard is about 800 something. So that's my report.
So what I would like to add to that report is I really would like for us, so you talk with the chief. Yes, I would like for him to come before the commission so we can continue the conversation. Secondly, I would like for us to hit those points that are related to the county executive point by point. I think that we owe to all the commission, since we wrote this and said these were our demands, these are the things that we're asking for, their specific answers to each one of those.
Right. He gave answers when I was there. As I said, in general, he's not against. I pointed out we might need legislation for banning chokeholds, banning no-knock warrants, banning shooting from a car. They do all that training, but it's not codified in law.
Right. I got your question to police, to the county executive about the whole legislative piece. I think we need to continue that conversation because I think that was kind of we didn't finish it. I have a hand, Tony, and then we'll end. Again, if we get cut off, guys, I will send out an email about getting back together. Tony, your comment?
My comment is, what was his hesitancy what is his hesitancy? Because it's continued to be hesitant for civilian review board. Did he talk about that?
Yes, he did. And he said he's not against it. He his position right now is that um, he wants to be able to run the police department, and he has some concerns about what the review board would do.
Give transparency.
Pardon?
Give transparency and accountability. That's what it's.
I agree. And so what he talked about was he knows that they're going to look at that, and he knows a number of different models, and he's willing to work with the county executive and anybody else on that.
Okay. Well, I think that we can have that conversation with him when if we go ahead and reconvene at our next meeting, and I don't mean the monthly meeting, but another special call meeting. If we can reconvene, invite him to that meeting and go over that list clearly with the things that you've talked about, Eugene, those things that are answered. But if anyone else has any questions, they can ask him at that time. I want to end the meeting on this note here. It's 8:15. Again, I will send out an email this evening, request date and time when we can all meet again. Unfortunately, we just have so much to get done. We can't squeeze it all into our 2-hour time frame. We may need to think differently about our training calendar, when we do that. So thank you all so very much. I appreciate you giving of your time. I know we don't pay you to do this, to go out and do all this extra stuff, but it's really meaningful, and we appreciate you. Pastor John, I see you smiling. It looks like we've lost a couple of people. You all have a great evening.
You too.
Good night.